Okay, we'll see how it goes. I had the mic on. Okay, can everyone hear me? Okay, good. I actually have a loud voice, so it doesn't really matter if I have a mic or not. This talk is about a framework for understanding engineering management through 10 evil things. As a disclaimer, they're not really evil. Perhaps none of them are even inherently evil if we use the Google corollary of evil, which is if Google does it, it can't be evil. I will begin the way I've always begun my talks by explaining who I am. And let's face it, it's been a really long time since I've spoken at a PHP conference, and you probably don't know me. It's slow. The builds are slow because I haven't practiced this talk. At the conference, you've already seen Larry Ellman give a couple talks on how he became a web developer, programmer, speaker, and teacher. And what's going to follow here in the beginning is my version of how I got here as a teacher, developer, architect, manager, and a speaker. I've been working professionally on the consumer internet for quite a while now. But to set up this talk, I just want to talk about 3 of these jobs that I've had that I've highlighted. The first is Plaxo, which I worked at between 2004 to 2006. And Plaxo, when I started working there, was the first virally tuned website. And here's an article of TechCrunch around the time I left. Obviously, Plaxo is less evil because I left the company. And the next company I worked at was a social networking site called Tagged. I grew them from about 10 times to become the 3rd most popular network in the United States. Right before I left, Time Magazine proclaimed us the most annoying website in the world. I've managed to achieve. I'm just doing this to show that I may know a thing or two about evil. And then I decided to start working at the Wikimedia Foundation. Among other things, they're the nonprofit that maintains a little-known website known as Wikipedia. Perhaps you've heard of it. And when I worked there, I like to joke with my coworkers that I've worked on evil so long, I thought I'd give it a shot. And why do I mention those 3 things? Well, I had a different position at each of those 3 organizations. It provides a frame for my talk. I want to show you that the words we use actually to describe ourselves matter in how we do work or how we accomplish things. At Plaxo, I was their first web applications engineer, and my early talks often discussed what it meant to be an engineer. What's the meaning of an engineer? And in those talks, I talked about this thing called Code Complete. I often mention this book because we're here at the Microsoft Center, and this book was the tome of how Microsoft did software development in the 90s. And it was popular in the 90s because Windows 95 came out and people stood in line for that shit or something like that. So therefore, we should just follow everything Microsoft did. And the chief frame of this book is that good software development was like construction. You can see it right there in the title, complete as in like this building is complete. It's been completely built. And I want you to think about that and ask yourself, do you honestly believe that what you are is like this person? Think for a second on that. And in reality, the complete refutation of this book is actually found on the back cover with an endorsement from a guy named Fred Brooks, who wrote a book in the 60s, like decades before this book came out, called The Mythical Man Month. And it was based on Fred's experiences in software development, where he found that people and time are not interchangeable, that was a myth. Adding people to a late project made it later. What that means is terms like man hours, man months, and man years, when you use those terms come from construction and they're not actually relevant to development. You can't talk in terms of those because the problems that web developers solve, or developers solve in general, are people and time are not interchangeable components. And it's really important to understand that because it means the frame of software as construction is a completely bogus frame. So the actual frame is right there in my job title, engineer. In an obscure letter to the editor in the 90s, Jack Reeves wrote this. he basically described that the final goal of any engineering activity is some type of documentation. When the design effort is complete, the design documentation is turned over to a manufacturing team who actually does the building. So it's our job to design that documentation. It's called, I think, writing source code or something like that. And the machine builds that code. And it's because the construction of that code is cheap and done perfectly by a machine that we neglect to realize that actually construction is being done. And what we're doing is we're designing that. We're engineers designing the design document that something else goes and builds out. In fact, we call it building out the source code. Okay, so the correct frame and paradigm is that we are engineers, not construction workers, and the source code is the design, not the actual product. And this is the correct frame for software development in general. So on to the second thing, is I worked at Tagged, and Tagged was the social network, and I was their software architect. And I thought at the time, I wrote an article for PHP Advent, as well as I gave a talk on what it means to be an architect. It was called PHP Without PHP. And I talk about a single design pattern and how that defines what an architect means. At the time, I had just moved to, when I got my job at TAG, to San Francisco, and I started my job there. And I took this photo about 100 yards away from my daily run where I actually live in San Francisco. It's a picture of the Golden Gate Bridge from Land's End. And the question you can see, or that I posed in the article, is that the Golden Gate is a beautiful piece of architecture, and it uses an all-suspension design pattern. And that choice fits perfectly within the environment in which it lives. And the question I want to pose to you, and the thing I posed in the article, is that as software architects, can we aspire to make choices in our software using patterns to make it work in the environment it's in? Can software have that same sort of interaction with the environment that real architecture does? If we have a title, architect, what does that really mean? And yeah, and in this, you've seen some conference talks, in particular, an object-oriented technique known as SOLID, and you saw perhaps Jim's talk about UA design patterns. And I mentioned these is because these are related. Design patterns is like the language by which we do things. And there's a word in both of those cases, patterns. And so what does patterns mean? Well, usually we start with this thing, the Gang of Four book, which basically introduced design patterns to object-oriented programming. It's a really important book. But what most people don't realize is that the definition from that book, if you read the book, actually quotes another book about real architecture, this one by Christopher Alexander, called The Timeless Way of Building. And the quote of it is that each pattern describes a problem which occurs over and over again in our environment, and then describes the core of the solution to that problem in such a way that you can use the solution 1,000,000 times over without doing it the same way twice. It's a mouthful, so I'll just break it down for you. There's basically, a pattern is a vocabulary word. You have to name the pattern. It solves a problem. And then it's not an algorithm. It's not something you can do the same way over and over again. And it has consequences, i.e. it occurs in our environment. And the important thing to note is that it's a vocabulary word, as in words matter, again. In another talk, you saw Jonathan speak a talk about Laravel, which is a PHP framework. And the interesting part, and the part I found most interesting, is it's about when to use it and also when not to use it. That's what it means to say a pattern has consequences. Because when you have consequences, you make choices, and you make choices not to do things. And what you choose to do and what you don't do. And choices matter in patterns, and those consequences form the basis of making right choices as an architect. Luckily, in the architecture world, that was codified in the sequel to that book called A Pattern Language. And he outlines patterns that real architects use, and this formula is actually used in the Gang of Four book, that the whole Gang of Four book is basically this formula applied to object-oriented programming. So I hope you understand that for those of you who design, who are basically design architects or software architects or product architects, that basically patterns are the language you do things, and they describe how to do things well in the environment so that it fits well with the environment. So the last thing, the third thing of this is that I'm now Director of Features Engineering at the Wikimedia Foundation. And that's what this talk is about. What does it mean to be, what does a director actually do? As you can see, I've already said words matter. Architect, engineer, these words matter. And this brings us to the first evil thing, and probably the only one that may truly be evil, which is middle management, which is what I am. I'm appointed here boss. Whoa. Sorry about that. And probably to protect others, the organization did not allow me to work directly. Instead, I have to act through my minions, which unfortunately the volume isn't working. Yeah. So who are my minions? My minions, they're not my evil minions. Well, not evil minions, but I'm evil, so that's good enough. Features engineer is divided into those 4 teams. And these are my teams, as much as I could get pictures for them for. And the plus is the number of people or open recs that I have, or people who just chose not to be photographed on my 4 teams. And it doesn't cover everyone. This is just the engineering part of each of the teams. There's actually a product manager as well as a designer involved in the teams. The product managers report to my co-director, the director of product, Howie Fung. He worked at eBay, which is not quite evil. It's more like chaotic neutral. So, you know, we'll work that out. If you see my talks on management and hiring at this conference, you've seen talks on management and hiring at this conference. And what I'm not going to do is talk about those things, but it's important to remember that you've seen this about agile processes and how to manage the teams. And you'll just have to trust me in the case of Brian's talk on how to hire good engineers, that I actually did that. My engineers are awesome. But it still gets to the problem that is if you want to accomplish great evil, how do you do that, right? How do you get your minions to do this and not behave like this? Like talking at the water cooler, or doing pair programming. That's actually how people pair program, by the way. I don't know if you guys know that already. But so how can you make your minions effective? How do you win over minions and influence coders? And that's what this talk is really about. How do we use words to like basically get people to be productive? And if you've noticed, there's actually 4 basically phrases for that, and I'm going to tell you what they are. But if you've been paying attention, you've already noticed 2 of them. The first is a book, based on a book, What's the Matter with Kansas, where Thomas Frank wondered, why does Kansas vote Republican all the time when value-wise on every issue they think they actually prefer to be Democrats? And the answer, turns out, or a response was actually done by George Lakoff, and he explained that the issue is frames. Like when an example is when George W. Bush took office, he started, the whole organization started using the word tax relief. And Lakoff insisted that liberals were using the word tax relief, and they shouldn't, because the phrase tax relief was specifically manufactured to allow the possibility of only certain types of opinions. For instance, tax relief implies that taxes are an affliction and not something someone would want relief from. So the whole point is the language you use matters. And the example of that is framing. Another example that I've already used is design patterns. And this is a quote from the 3rd book, the sequel to the first 2 books, Timeless Way of Building and Pattern Language, where it basically explains that patterns patterns are basically cultural defined agreements and traditional approaches to well-known problems. In the Oregon experiment, it's an example of basically how to design the University of Oregon. You don't want to build a master plan because it's too rigid, and you don't want to have no plan at all. So examples of like a master plan is too rigid is University of Chicago, and Cal Berkeley, where the author is from, is an example where there's no plan at all. And both of them kind of fail, and you want to create something more like the Oxford University, where a pattern seems to form naturally, and it's well organized and can grow with the university. And basically, he describes that if you codify the patterns and that you allow patterns to provide the framework, that can happen. Well, I want to give two new terms. The first is habits. And this is a quote from The Power of Habit, where he's talking about basically how Rick Warren built his major thing in Saddleback Ranch. And the point that Rick Warren is saying is basically that you need, habits allow people to have self-identity and to be self-supported and self-guided. That you're basically giving them the framework in the form of a habit, and they can grow into that beyond what you could do if you actually asked them to do things. And it becomes a self-propelling idea. And the last one, because we're an organization, is Built to Last, where they found in Built to Last that companies with a core value system, a core ideology, end up being far more successful than organizations without. It's pretty major difference. And you see that in the form of that the core values and holding true to them create a strong sense of identity and a thread of continuity that holds through the organization no matter how it changes. Well, those 4 words, I don't care what you call them. The point is that words are frames, right? And those frames are empowering when they speak to our shared values, right? And they form our habits and habits of everyone we interact with, including our users. And our choice in using them, like a choice in design patterns, matters. So how do we apply this? Well, the first question is, why do features at Wikipedia at all? I mean, isn't it just awesome? Wikipedia is kind of done. Well, the answer is, you may believe that, and you point to statistics like this, which show that 500 million visitors, unique visitors, every month visit Wikipedia. So isn't the problem just maintaining the site, not writing features? And you might be thinking that this talk is going to be a scaled version of the Etsy talk, or about more data access and performance stuff thrown in, like Sherry's talk. But no, this talk isn't about those things. So I hope you didn't miss Jonathan or Sherry's talk, because I'm not going to talk about those things. Instead, I'm going to talk about this. This is our vision statement. And imagine a world in which every single human being can freely share in the sum of all knowledge. And I want to understand features from that. So first of all, doesn't this resemble a core value? So if I'm going to do something, and by the way, a pair of cultural anthropologists looked at Wikipedia and called us, Wikimedia Foundation called us the most mission-driven organization they had ever studied. So this is the reason why, because everyone at the foundation can quote this or some variation of this. It's on the back of our business cards, but we truly believe it. This is our purpose. And when we look at that, then 500 million is not enough, okay? 500 million is not enough. Let me give you some numbers. This is the number, this is the number of people in the world, right? 7 billion. 2.2 billion of them are on the internet, of which 500 million are reading Wikipedia. But this is the number that actually edit Wikipedia, create content, not just on Wikipedia, all the wiki projects, English, German, whatever, Wiktionary, Wikiquotes, Commons, all of these things, only 80,000 people. So if we're actually going to have every single human being freely share in the knowledge, we should at least be able to reach 2.2 billion someday. And if not, then the 80,000 that are creating content should be more like the 500 million that are actually accessing the content, if you want to freely share. And that's what it's really about, right? That if you look at our vision statement, oops, sorry, I screwed that up. I go too fast, you know. I mess things up. I probably shouldn't have hit the back button because it really doesn't like me. But basically, if we want Wikipedia around for the long term, for our children's children, then we need a vibrant editing base, right? Okay, and why is that happening? Well, let me show you the growth curve of editors on Wikipedia. So this is it over time, okay? This is English Wikipedia, by the way. And this graph is what motivates us in features. And for a piece, if you've ever heard this term hockey stick, well, there you go. There's a hockey stick. But there's the stuff after the hockey stick. What the hell is going on with that? I mean, that's not growth. That's we call this the oh shit graph. Because it's like, yeah, you have the growth, but now you're dying in terms of editor base, and this is not wrong, and it's been happening for 6 years. At another organization, usually your editors are directly tied with revenue, so the instant that it starts going down, you throw a fit and you do something. But Wikipedia wasn't considering this. We were looking at the reader numbers for years, okay? And that brings us to the second evil. The second evil is heat death. So there's a theory in cosmology that because of the arrow of time increases with entropy, eventually the universe will reach a state where it exhausts the usable energy of the universe. And like this, basically Wikipedia is exhausting the usable editor energy of the current editor base. What's really going on, if you were to look at this, something occurred in 2006. And this is basically another graph. And what this graph is the retention in the editors, 1 year retention in editors. So editors who are active, are they making an edit 1 year later? And you can see this is massive decline. So new editors aren't editing. And what's really going on is old editors are not being replaced by new ones. And you can actually see that if you break it down by cohort. So this is in cohort, and you can see that the later ones are just not adding the traffic to overcome the natural decline in the other editors. So the frame I want to give from that is that stability, like just making the site stable, is going to lead to stagnation and death, just like the universe will eventually have a heat death. And we want to reach every single person. We don't want to stagnate. So how do you do that? Well, the way you look at that is you look at the data. And I've given some data, but I want to give you more anecdotes that really hammer this home, right? Because a lot of people say, well, it's because it's an encyclopedia, so there's nothing left to write. Well, this is the places in the world which have geographically tagged Wikipedia articles, right? And oops, did I do that too fast? Sorry. It does that. So the first one is places in the world that actually have geographic entries, and then this is geographically tagged Wikipedia articles. You can see that that US and Europe are overrepresented, and nearly the rest of the world is underrepresented. As an example of this in practice, when the last Egyptian president, Mohamed Morsi, was elected during the Arab Spring, the article stub for Mohamed Morsi got deleted because it was submitted by a person who had no edit history. That's absurd. I mean, obviously he is notable, so what the hell happened? Well, they're judging the book by the editor that wrote it. And I mean, us living in America, Mohammed who, right? Here's another example. This is a study of Wikipedia article length separated by gender preference. So the horizontal bar is the number of standard deviations a movie is. So the left is presumably movies about robots. They're very male. And the right is very female, like maybe vampires or something like that. And the top to down is the average size of the article. And you can see that basically articles that appeal to males, there's a lot of content on it. For ones that appeal to Twilights of the world, you don't get as much. You get about half as much. And that's a problem because Wikipedia basically reflects the internet of 2006. So you pick any flavor of Linux, no matter how small, and I bet you there'll be a Wikipedia article on it. But Kate Middleton's wedding dress was actually marked for deletion as not being notable. That's an example of this, because of the bias in the editor base inherently. Okay, we need to fix that, right? So how do you do that? Like, what does the features engineer actually do to fix this? Well, this brings us to the third evil, which is affordances, right? And what is an affordance? An affordance is like a light switch. It's called qualities that enable discovering actions without thinking. So if you see a light switch, in fact, last night I was staying at my girlfriend's cousin's place, and I couldn't find the light switch, but it was easy because I just reached about here, and there was something, right, when it was dark. That's an affordance. I can do that without thinking, right? And there are affordances on the web also. Steve Krug introduced us to this, and it's not like Wikipedia is immune to these things, right? An example of this is search. The top example is the search bar in Safari, and the bottom one is on Wikipedia. Do you see the magnifying glass? Basically is that affordance. You know that if I type in there, it's searching. Similarly, bookmarking affordances exist. These are actually not static affordances, but I was too lazy to make the animation for it. The top is pinning on Pinterest, which is a form of bookmarking, and the bottom is the star that you click on wish lists on Wiki to monitor a page for changes. Okay, and the behavior is nearly the same. If I could actually animate this, you would see that. That's an affordance also, a web affordance. And furthermore, we're way beyond the salad days of Wikipedia. And this is WordPress's failed login affordance. It does the shaking of the head like a real world affordance of shaking my head. Like, no, 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 you failed. Okay? And like when you create those dynamic things, you've seen that in these talks. Basically, these talks are going to give you the power to build the next generation web affordances. Or in the case of Anna Filna's talk on jQuery Mobile, it's leveraging an existing affordance, the mobile app space, for the web. That's what you're really doing when you're studying these things. Okay. So let's get back to the numbers. Okay. This is the number we're talking about, the 0.016% of people who are editing that were readers before. Well, what is that step? What is the alpha affordance of that step? Well, the alpha affordance is when you click on that edit button and everything that happens after that point, right? The moment they do that and actually edit, they become an editor. They're no longer a reader, right? And here's the experience people actually see. This is from 2008, a study Wikipedia did, the Foundation did.
Nah.
I was making you say nah here.
I have no clue how to do that.
Okay.
Toolbox, right? Template. Oh, look at all that. I don't really know about it. No, I can't do it. I cannot add a section if I have no idea how to add a section. Well, that's fairly a lot more than I'm willing to mess with. It's quite a bit of HTML to forget it. I'm getting fairly frustrated. Not do it at all.
Overall, how do you feel about doing all this stuff? How does
Yeah, it makes you feel stupid when you edit it, right? And the reason I showed that video is because we've seen references to that in talks today about, it's about different things like UX, usability testing and UX design. But you see that, that basically the concept is to get into the customer's shoes and understand that. And basically you're seeing a window of what it looks like for most readers when they try to become editors. And we need to fix that, right? So how do we do that? Well, I don't know, but I want to show you what it actually looks like. This is me this morning. I decided I wanted to add a reference to PHP. The stuff on the criticism stage, there was only one link to like why PHP sucks, which I thought was absurd. So I decided I go in and add a thing. It's actually pretty difficult. Then I have to find where it is in the criticism section. Oh, there it is. And then I go in and I'm like, okay, now I have to add a reference. And I'm pretty good with Wikipedia, actually, because my girlfriend started editing, and she had more edit counts than me, and that's embarrassing because I worked there, so I started learning how to edit. And you have to type ref, site, bracket, site, web, bar, URL equals something, so I get the URL, paste it, bar, title equals blah, 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 and then bracket, then /ref, and that's how you add an reference. It's really long and involved, and I won't bore you with it. Let's just skip that shit. To give you an idea of what it's like to edit Wikipedia before June of this year. So what we really want to do is create a today's affordance. What do people on the internet today do? And they look at WordPress, which has TinyMCE as a visual editor, or Google Docs. We need that, okay? That's not very easy to do it turns out it's very difficult to do on Wikipedia. And I'll explain that later, but this is the team that does it. It's actually my largest team. It's about half my engineers devoted to it. And when you consider the interface our editors act with in the wiki, it doesn't resemble those modern affordances. And the visual editor and Parsoid teams in features are trying to update this affordance because it's the alpha of all affordances. It's the first thing that a person sees when they become a visual editor. And this is what the visual editor looks today. And I'm like doing the same thing, but I'm adding a different, there's a lot of PHP Sucks articles. I'm adding a different reference. Now I'm right there. I can see it. There's the criticism session. And then I click on that and I'm like, oh, it's this bookmark bar. So I do that and I just type in a reference, your language sucks. And then I go to get the URL. And I notice it's one word, your language sucks, on theory.com or theory.org. So I add that in. And then I just do it just like you would on Google Docs or something. You know, I just paste in the hyperlink. Boom, I'm done, right? But since it was so easy, I thought, you know, it has cleanup templates. This section requires expansion. And I'm like, I know a lot about how PHP sucks, so I'm going to add some shit like how it interferes with, people believe it interferes with productivity because the language design is terrible. So I just write all that sort of stuff in. I realized that this thing about inconsistent functions and blah, blah, blah. But I realized that this thing about multi-threading was not actually documented in any of the previous sucks documents, but I was too lazy to look it up, so I added a citation needed template on the whole thing. And you can do all this from the visual editor, believe it or not. Wikipedia is very difficult because it's a full-blown Turing-complete programming language underneath the templating language. So I'm sorry, I'm typing too slow, but that's basically what I'm doing here. And then I save it and other things happen. And I wish I could speed it up, but I'm too... Yeah, it's fun to know how PHP sucks. So, Wikipedia is written in PHP, and I've been doing all my development in PHP, but it's nice to have an honest view of the world. And Wikipedia does have as one of its 4 pillars a neutral point of view. So even though we're built on Wikipedia, we have to explain why it sucks, right? And certainly one sentence does not do justice to PHP, even the negative parts. And I added this citation. OK, so there's me adding another link, the fractal of bad design, which was very popular last year. And then I go in and I'm like, oh, yeah, but this crap here, that needs a citation. So I move it down there, because those are missing features. And that's not what people were complaining about in the other articles. And then I add the citation needed template. And the point is I added that so that you can go in, find a good article about how those features are missing, and add a citation yourself. And also because it's just cool to be able to add a template, because that's usually a very difficult thing to know what template. You go bracket, bracket, blah, blah, blah. But here I just type citation needed, boom. It does a find as you type, and I added it. Pretty awesome. So what are some of the considerations in the visual editor? Well, these are it. The visual editor needs to support collaborative editing and playback because people will do things on Wikipedia that you can't solve right now or are very difficult to solve. For instance, they'll move a paragraph from one section to another and just change the word not, like add a word not, and change the whole meaning of the thing. But because the diff looks like just a paragraph move, people will not see that sort of vandalism. And if you had playback, you could actually play back the vandalism. You didn't actually see that. It needs to be easily extensible because we have to support a Turing-complete programming language underneath, but also because we want to support things that aren't MediaWiki. The thing is written in JavaScript and it's actually not tied to MediaWiki. And the way it's able to do that, this is the stack, is that it reads and writes HTML plus RDFA. So it's actually an HTML editor. It's generic, so we could use this on WordPress or something like that. And the last thing is dirty diffs. Like other HTML editors you've seen, if you go from source mode to HTML mode and back to source mode, everything changes. Well, this doesn't happen in this editor because it keeps a linear model of the actual HTML that you wrote, and it preserves that while you're editing. And to explain how that HTML plus RDFA thing looks like, this is the full stack that introduces the parsoid part of the thing. And you have wiki text, and then the parsoid reads and writes that HTML. So what it looks like right now, previously, before the visual editor, is there was a PHP parser, and then and that was a one-way parser. Sorry about that. You know, I should never go back because I screwed that up. Yeah, come on. There it is. It's a one-way parser, and we need to go both ways, and that's what Parsoid does by adding RDFA metadata to everything. And the reason why I mention that is because you've seen 3 talks that basically are the 3 pieces of the Parsoid. First, regular expressions are how it works, and you can see if you went to that talk that regular expressions are a very one-way mapping. Right? And we need a 2-way mapping, so we can't use the existing Parsoid. And so what we do is we code in the semantic web. We code in RDFA. We embed metadata in it so that it allows us to reverse the process. And the whole thing is written in Node.js. So this is on web scraping in Node.io, but the same software that does it. And it has to do with the fact that PHP doesn't do B trees very fast. By the way, JavaScript also handles it terribly. It's just that Google spent a lot of fucking money optimizing JavaScript in V8, and Node uses V8, so it actually performs fast, even though as a language it's just as poorly designed for B-tree manipulation as it. You need B-tree manipulation to build a parser. It's a compiler design problem. This is a quote, and the reason I have this quote is to show that there's a lot of resistance in Wikipedia for making sites look like Facebook. Okay, because obviously people self-selected to join Wikipedia because they don't like Facebook or Twitter or any of these social things, right? They're very asocial. They were like, something's wrong with the internet, must fix, right? Not like, hey, let's chat, or let me show you my picture of my feet, or something like that. So instead of using words like we need to modernize to look like Facebook, I like to say we need design affordances. We need to express language in the same way. Because in the first term, modernize, the community would be static under the first term. They're going to push back because it resembles modern social networking. It has a social networking connotation. But design affordance is really about freely sharing. If we're to freely share, we need to speak the language of the internet. And the language of the internet is the language of design. You've seen that in these talks, like tons of talks on this. Wikipedia is available in 280 languages. And I didn't mention this, but the visual editor supports most of them, and which is like kind of crazy. Like they actually had a slide where if I played that slide back in Keynote, Keynote would crash. It's just a slide of various languages and other things that the visual editor supports, and it actually crashes Apple Keynote, where Apple controls the full stack, and they can't even get it to work. And what affordance shows us is that good design is the universal language of the web. And if we want to freely share, how can you freely share and refuse to speak in that language? So you've learned about that in these talks and others at the conference. So let's go on to the 4th evil, because I'm going too long. And that is the habit loop. I already mentioned the power of habit, but let me explain what it is, okay? And this is to further understand what we're trying to do here in features. And in the power of habit, Charles Duhigg talks about habit loops. And our habits, we are our habits, and our habit loops describe what we are. And they consist of 3 things: a cue, routine, and reward. And let me explain those in terms of actual habits, right? So a habit, like a bad habit like alcoholism, the cue might be I'm feeling depressed. The routine is I drink some alcohol. The reward is I no longer fucking feel depressed, so it's awesome. And it's true for good habits. Like the cue might be I wake up in the morning. Routine is I do my exercises. The reward is I feel really great. I haven't been working out in the morning, and that's probably why I'm all nervous and jumpy and all these things. Because I haven't been doing my exercise. But if I do it enough, then it becomes this habit. You see that on the internet. An example is social gaming, which I'll get to, so don't worry. That's a bad one, in my opinion, or at least from a Wikipedia perspective. It's a bad habit. But editing Wikipedia is a good habit. And what the routine is that the visual editor is solving the routine part of that habit. It's making that routine easier to do, okay? But we haven't talked about the cues or the rewards. So let's talk about that, but first I want you to note this. This is really important. They call it a habit loop, but it's not a real loop. Like, how do you go from the reward to the whatever? Well, in the power of habit, the concept is the cues are everywhere. Like, I feel depressed all the time, so that's why I'm drinking alcohol. But that's not a real loop. But the internet is different. So where do we apply those changes? Well, I'm going to give you the fifth evil, viral growth. I want you to study something where there actually is a loop, the viral loop. And I'll show you how that works. So this is a Hotmail, a picture of Hotmail. It's the first viral website. How does this work? Get a free email. You see this signal line at the bottom of every Hotmail. Want a free email with Hotmail? Sign up now. So here's how it works. Here's how it creates exponential growth. Hotmail places a viral link, right? Let's just go through it. A user signs up, right? They send emails. A certain fraction of them send emails. This is called a funnel, right? And then a new user reads that email, gets that email, and then they click on the link, and then maybe they sign up. That's a loop. Do you see what's going on? It's a positive feedback loop. But you might be wondering, well, how do you get viral growth if everything's a certain fraction? Well, the answer is you send a lot of emails, right? So that's the positive multiplier that creates a positive feedback to this loop. This is how viral marketing and virality actually work. So you can study this, okay? And we could use terms like this, but that would be dangerous because viruses have bad connotations, so I don't like doing that. I like to use the word force multiplication. And the reason I like to use this word isn't just arbitrary because of frame, but because the job of the foundation is to reach every single human being with the sum of all knowledge. If we want to, and allow them to freely share, if we want to do that with only 100 and some employees, and we're never going to be much bigger, probably tapped out at 300 according to our wildest dreams, then each person who works at the foundation needs to be a force multiplier, needs to empower other people. They can't do it by themselves. And that's really where the concept of viral growth is. Now let's try to apply it to habits. And that gets us to the sixth evil, gamification, which isn't really evil. It's more like so not good, right? But let's study this in terms of habits and viral loops, okay? Because it's really important you guys understand this. Because sometimes I wonder if Zynga understands it, given that Clash of Clans is way more popular or something like that. In social games, what happens is a user sees some sort of social cue, which reminds them to check their crops on Farmville. They check their crops on, they do routine on some stuff. I don't know, I don't play Farmville, so they click on some shit, right? I hope I'm not oversimplifying because I actually don't play Farmville, but they get a reward. And the reward is to brag how awesome their crops are on some social network. I'm assuming this because I haven't played, but I did play like Mafia Wars for a little bit, so I assume it's like this, right? And that is a habit loop. You have your cue, your routine, and your reward. But how do you make this a viral loop? How do you magnify? Well, the key is a new user. A different user brings the loop back, okay, to turn it into a real feedback loop. What ends up happening is a new user gets a cue. They see that person's post on their social network, they engage in their routine, and they brag on their social network, and this forms a loop, a real feedback loop, but this time multiplying time, not users like viral loops do. They're occupying time. Time is known as engagement. And we have a team devoted to not adding games to Wikipedia, but to that term engagement, right? Which is time spent on this. In the web world, that's known as time spent. And the editor engagement team is devoted to that. To explain that is they work on two projects, Echo, which is already launched, and Flow, which will launch. Okay? And the idea is, Echo and Flow close that loop. And I'm going to show you how that is. But think of the Echo and Flow, when I talk about them, as being APIs, but not for APIs for computers, but APIs for human interactions. Okay? And that's basically what's going on. So Echo is basically notifications. Okay? And how it looks is, it just kind of looks like this. You get some notifications, right? The fact is before like March of this year, you didn't get that. There was like one form of notification someone wrote on your talk page. And you guys don't know what a talk page is, and that's what Flow's about. But that's the only thing. You get a notice that says you got a talk page message. But under the reason why this is important is we can see that around 2007 there's a massive increase in things like criticism and warnings and teaching. Teaching stuff is static, but increase in criticism and warnings, basically negative shit, and a very massive decrease in basic basically praise in the system. And this is an indicator of what's going wrong with Wikipedia, is that we're giving all this negative feedback. We're very good at surfacing the negative stuff. But notifications adds all of this stuff. So talk page message is the only thing that existed before Echo, but all this stuff exists after Echo, and I'm really sorry that these slides are automatic when they clearly weren't when I was editing them. But these are it. So things like user block, it's going to go again. But things like user block are for advanced editors, but you saw thanks and mentions. What mentions is I can @, people, and they actually receive a notification. So if I'm on a talk page somewhere, I can @ someone and bring them into the conversation. You couldn't do this before Echo. And do you see how that is a lot like the habit loop? Because what ends up happening is they're brought back into the conversation. So adding Echo is creating the framework. And one of the other examples is welcome. And I put it in parentheses because it wasn't actually made by the editor engagement team. It was made by a different team. Okay? Well, here's what Flow is. Flow is a discussion system. Before Flow, and Flow doesn't exist yet, so currently, there's something called talk pages. And what talk pages are is a wiki page. You edit a wiki page when you want to talk to someone. So imagine someone, that when I joined the foundation, a board member wrote, hey, it's nice to see another physicist on board. And I didn't know how to respond to him. Because all you see is like an edit to your talk page. So then I'm like, how do I reply? Well, the convention varies from wiki to wiki, but basically what you do is you hit colon to indent. You edit your own talk page. You hit colon to indent. Then you do the reply. Then you say tilde, 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 which writes your signature. And then you're not done yet. You go to their talk page and you say, hey, I wrote a reply. Link back to your thing. Okay, and somehow you're supposed to figure this out naturally. The affordance of this is disastrous, right? And what Flow seeks to do is make it actually resemble the affordance of the way people collaborate on everywhere else, Stack, Exchange, whatever you want to talk about, basically that sort of thing. And why this happens is there's been a massive rise in the machines. This is a graph. The gray thing at the bottom is actual user-to-user messages. And every other thing is either a bot or a script that someone's running to do stuff. And this is what has happened. You can see in 2006 a massive explosion of bot messages and other formal templates and other crap that says your page was reverted and other stuff like that. And very, very little user-to-user communication. And user-to-user communication is the key to engagement, right? So we need to add that back in. And you might think of Echo and Flow and say notifications and messaging. This is like trivial stuff. It's old hat. But I want to remind you of this talk on package management in PHP. The reason why is it's better late than never. Sometimes it's very difficult to do things, but it's better to do it. So, I mean, and it's like PHP may be late to the package management party, but it's now here and ready to rock, right? So same with Echo and Flow. And the reason why is our tools are pushing us to bad behaviors. We should identify those behaviors and make a path to make those things easy. Okay, that's really about habits. So the negative frame is gamification because obviously it resembles Zynga. And I want to talk about it, I talked about it in terms of habits. So fine, we've talked about all these sort of features, and they're supposedly supposed to change everything, but how do you but really when you think about it, adding Echo notifications or adding discussion system is only installing a lever into the system or a visual editor. The question is, how do you use those three things to pull the lever, to actually increase engagement? So that brings us to the next team, but first I want to talk about an evil, which is, I mentioned this, viral marketing. So think about viral marketing. Have you ever thought, what is the difference between word-of-mouth marketing and viral marketing? I mean, people use that interchangeably sometimes, and they shouldn't, because it actually has a distinctly different meaning. And the different meaning is this, that you can measure everything in viral marketing, but you can't in word-of-mouth marketing. The viral, whether it's a viral loop or gamification loop, unlike in the meat-based world of word-of-mouth marketing, every step in the funnel can be measured and optimized. And that optimization is traditionally known as A/B testing. That's the industry argot for this. And that's my eighth evil, so I'm almost caught up. And that brings us to my third team, which is the Editor Engagement Experimentation, or E3 team. Okay? And their job is to figure out how to pull the lever, when to pull the lever. And that's the purpose of the team. And here are the experiments they've worked on in the last year. a lot of them, and I won't talk about all of them. In event logging's case, that measurement is literal. That's what event logging is about. But some of these experiments, whether it's post-edit feedback, account creation, onboarding, or guided tours, they're understandable from words I've already talked about: queues, viral funnels, affordances, rewards. These are the whole point of each of these experiments. And then they measure that and A/B test that to optimize that to see whether it changes. And I'll just talk about one of them. And the one I want is the onboarding experiment. Otherwise, it's actually two things. It's the onboarding and it's the guided tours one. So here's some video of this in user testing. So before this, on Wikipedia, you would just be, after you created an account, you'd just be dropped back onto the page. Now you actually get something where you can do things. He's trying to fix spelling.
Areas, which I'm not familiar with at all.
And then he realizes he can't because it's kind of is very difficult. And so therefore, we added a guided tour to not drop them right into the editing, the reading interface, but to tell them how to get started. And the text of this guided tour is actually powered by the wiki. The wiki pulls in various wiki pages to do this. So the editors of English Wikipedia can modify it for their needs. They can add to it. They can subtract from it. They can change the behavior on the wiki.
Basically 2 sentences, well 3 sentences, explaining exactly what I need to do.
So when they go through the guided tour, they see other things.
Easily understood. So the question here is there information on the page what you expected? That exactly is a little bit more better.
So he's actually got more than he expected by getting the guided tour entry.
But I do appreciate that there is one. Clear indication of how to go. I've been doing this for 7 minutes now, so I'm just going to click OK. And it also gives me show help. So scan through the article, tag.
So guided tour, and I don't know if you can see it, but it actually points to the templates below, and it says that these are the ways you can fix the article to make it better.
Okay, so scan through the article tag.
And then when he hits start, it actually points to the edit button after he does this and says that you can go here to edit and things like that. So they just recently changed it to point to the visual edit button.
So it's a guided tour. You can edit the entire article by clicking here. Edit. All right, next. I'm going to move this up here, that bit. Is if you wanted to edit the specific section.
Well, that gives you an idea of user testing. And what are the results of this experiment? Well, here are the results of getting started in guided tour. There's a 2% increase from baseline of activations. That's people making one or more edits of the site. That sounds really small. But statistically, to reverse the editor decline, all we need is 1,000 to 2,000 additional active editors per month. That extra 2% of activations gets us actually halfway there if they end up becoming active at the same rate the current baseline is. That's very impressive, I think, from a very small thing. That's the nature of force multiplication or virality, is that a small multiplier change can make a huge difference. You will, if we can do 2 of these sort of experiments, then we'll actually reverse the editor decline on English Wikipedia. But I want to mention this because when you talk about data, a lot of organizations are data-driven. In fact, I worked at 2 of them. And you drive yourself, if you're data-driven, off the cliff with data. These are actual examples that I showed you before of how we drove off the cliff. Plaxo was considered evil because they were so viral that they annoyed every user. Tagged, that article appeared right before they changed the data told them to change a certain aspect of the wording on an email. That was very deceptive to the user, but it actually got our viral coefficient greater than 1. It was like, instead of you've been tagged, someone wants to share a photo with you. But it's really not a photo, it's just an image. But they call it a photo, and it turns out people love photos, so they just click through all that shit to get that. And that's the problem with being data-driven. You don't want to drive yourself off the cliff. So instead of using that, I like to use the word data-informed. Okay? It's like add some common sense to it. You don't just follow what the data tells you, you need to add some common sense. We should be data informed in the way we do things. So that's the sort of frame. And that brings us to my third thing. Since we're talking about data and quantities, I want to tell about my last group, fundraising engineering, right? And the fundraising engineering does the annual fundraiser. They write the software for the annual fundraiser. And this is a graph. The green thing is last year's 2012's annual fundraiser compared to the previous year. They brought in, do you see that day? That one day they brought in $2.1 million. It was phenomenal. Unlike in the commercial world, Wikipedia has an added restriction. As many things in the foundation, taking fundraising as a model, there was a $2 million day and all, and we see these statistics, and that's great. But that's not the meaning. The meaning is not in the numbers in themselves, but it means that the fundraiser was shorter this year. It was phenomenally short. It was only 8-9 days. You probably didn't even notice the fundraiser because it was turned off so quickly. Because we got the amount of revenue that the annual plan set to within a 10-day period, so we just turned it off. And we want to do that because our goal is not to bring in the most amount of money. Our goal is to reach that goal so that we can operate and create a shorter, more efficient, less impact on the user. That is it. It's a qualitative difference, not a quantitative difference. And that brings us to my ninth evil, which is quantity versus quality, right? Commercial companies use terms like virality, gamification, and money, right? Which is the biggest quantity of all. But if you look at our vision statement, we're talking about qualities. Every single human being, or freely share, or sum of all knowledge. The object is not to generate a huge pile of cash, but to create the sum of all human knowledge. And this reminds me of a problem that I have, which is I often say the foundation is a product-driven organization, but if you notice, driven is a bad idea. We don't want to be product-driven. What speaks closer to our values is to be consensus-oriented. And that, to understand what I mean by that is a quote I found from Reid Hoffman, where he said that there are 3 disciplines that go into product-based founders. Those are design, product management, and then there's engineering. Ideally, you should have all 3. Well, for us to develop products, we need more than that. We need all of these, and we need them to inform our decision, but no single one to drive them. And these are the core disciplines that drive features engineering: product engineering, design, data, and community. We want to be balanced in our approach to that, so we derive consensus across all 5. Right? And I think for other organizations, the first 4 are pretty much the operating set of what marks a successful web company. You need these 4 core disciplines, and you don't want one to dominate. Like if data dominates, you end up with a tagged or something like that. You've seen organizations where product is dominated, or engineering is dominated, or design is dominated. Well, there are very few where design is dominated. But you've seen these sort of things, and when they're not in balance, bad things happen. And in the talks, you've seen things like this. And the reason why I chose these 2 talks is the cracking the code of content development. He mentions that content design and programming are the 3 legs of the website's stool, right? And in You Can UX 2, there was this thing about showing programmers how to tap into the UX part of their brain. It's about that. It's about appreciating that we do things as a team, not as individuals, right? To be more than the sum of our parts. And finally, I'm not too far over, responsive design is the last of my evils. A lot of you already know what responsive design is, but if you don't, here it is from the Boston Globe. The point of the video is that whether it's a smartphone or a tablet size, it's not automatic. It's not automatic and it's not reactive. Instead, it responds to the user action of changing the browser window. So it empowers the user to basically choose their format. If their browser basically requests a format at this side, they get a mobile version. It's not like if you have an iPhone, you get a mobile version. It's the iPhone requests a browser window of a certain size, and then you design for that size. That's what responsiveness means, and that's what mobile first tells us, is to basically design for all devices. And there are tons of talks on this, so I won't bore you with it. You guys have already seen all of these talks. But there are tons of things about this mobile first pattern. And The reason I mention this is because there's a lot of reactivity on Wikipedia and the foundation and everything. It especially comes in terms like bike shedding. And I was like, what the hell is bike shedding? And the answer is when an engineer who's very senior wants to, or anyone who's very senior wants to dismiss someone else because you're consensus driven, right? And so people get on big tangents, like this talk has been one big tangent. And you want to stop that. You go, let's stop bike shedding about it and get work done. Okay, it means you're wasting my time by arguing over how we need to paint the bike shed, and I just want to build it. And I don't like it because it's a very reactive way of talking, and it dismisses the other person's content out of hand. So I like to say, well, you're not responsive enough. Like, not that you're wasting my time, but your solution doesn't actually empower people to do more. It just solves that one reactive problem, and I'm asking you to do more. And that's why I use those terms, and I expect those same things out of my engineers. So in summary of the whole thing, let's see if I didn't skip it too much. In summary, here are the 10 evils. Who am I? I'm the pointy haired boss. What do we do at Features? Why do we do this? We want to prevent the heat death of Wikipedia. What are Features doing about it? We're trying to create affordances and assisting in habit formation to create positive feedback loops of engagement. Where do we want to install these changes? Using principles of gamification and viral marketing to install the levers. When do you pull those levers? With measurement and A/B testing tempered by the knowledge that quantities are just proxies for the qualities we want to achieve. By designing and responsively, we create bold systems that empower the community, not ignoring or reacting to it. So those are the 10 evil things. Well, except for the middle management thing. Whoever does that, that guy is really evil. I just want to just show you a story that like codifies this framing thing.
I'm a storyteller at the Wikimedia Foundation in San Francisco. So in 2005, I was a film student at Columbia College, Chicago. I was in the computer lab and I was researching a paper. And all my Google searches kept coming up with this website that gave me all this junk. I do a Google search and we have one sentence summary of everything. And I thought this was really annoying. I hated it. And I saw in the corner it said, you can edit this. I said, okay, I click edit. And then I wrote some junk in there, pressed save, and I'm like, haha, okay, I did it. I got my revenge. And then 10 minutes later, it was reverted. And I'm like, okay, so this is kind of weird. What just happened? And then so I did it again. And then it happened again. And I'm like, oh my God, Wikipedia is invincible.
Let's talk about that story of invincibility. The whole story, it's not timid, it's bold, right? It's not a policy, it's a system that actually does it. There's no thing like if Victor edits, we're going to undo it. It's more like if someone makes vandalism, we're going to undo it. And the community was not the obstacle for our solutions. It was actually empowered to make those changes on their own. And it's not automated or reactive. It wasn't bots that reverted to Victor. It was people. The system was responsive. And that's what we need to do. We need to create bold systems that empower the community to be responsive and not reactionary. That's what Features is trying to do. Okay, so how does this prescription apply to your business or your organization? Well, I just want you to understand, you want to find the things that hold your organization back like a bad habit, right? And you want to, don't directly fight against that habit like a frame, don't not think of an elephant or something like that. Instead, you should look to your core values and find some stronger frame that forms the successful social agreement and name it. It's called a pattern then. And then instill those habits religiously to give people the sense of purpose so that they can be empowered to find those solutions. And then just be, as a manager, just be consistent in how you do things because it allows people to be both self-directed and and create a self-propelling movement. And that's basically what this talk is about. And I want you to see how those sort of actions, right, can create Wikipedia, but also how those actions can be applied to you and the things you learn can be applied to this. Here's another video about from a movie.
But I think it's fair to say
That's Vint Cerf.
Tipping point in terms of people's access to computer-based information.
No.
The world is changing. The numbers of languages are reducing, and there will be a time when we will be one race speaking one language. That's where we're headed.
¿Ustedes tienen idea de lo que es una laptop?
Es estudio.
In the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, the rest of the world is going to come online. But for the first time, we're going to be hearing directly from people we've not heard from before.
¿Qué significa civilización? La gente habla que civilización yo no entiendo. ¿Qué significa?
Gosh, you look at all of human history and you have a good 40,000 years of just talking face-to-face interaction. And then you get the printing press, and then 500 years you get electronic communication, and now every day there's probably 5 or 6 new applications, and it changes the way everybody's.
Because of things like Facebook and Twitter, there's millions of people, hundreds of millions of people that are trained to use this type of software now. So all the stars kind of align and allow you to do things that you've never been able to do.
I think there's a certain way in which these connections are becoming easier to make. As these connections become more automatic, then what happens to our sense of real connection?
Aquí primero, ¿sí? Después poner Google.
For the first time, it is theoretically possible to communicate with every human being on Earth and to allow them to communicate with each other and to connect them to the people and to the knowledge that they need to make something of their own lives.
What have we lost? We know what we've gained, and telephones and whatever else is characteristic of modernization, but what have we lost? The story of humanity is a story of cultural conditions disappearing by human choice.
When we or our grandchildren look back and see what we made of the internet, when we were the first people to shape its place in society, the question they're going to ask is, did they use it to change the world?
That's the name of the documentary. But the reason I included that is to make you guys understand that it's not about Wikipedia or whatever, it's about reaching things that intrinsically motivate people. And you need to create those frames or discover them really and provide them to people if you're to get anything done. Like Wikipedia has as its core vision to reach every single human being and allow them to freely share in the sum of all knowledge. And my hope is you can do that. And since I haven't really talked at PHP at a PHP conference, I just thought I'd bring a little bit up about this article. This is actually, this hammer was made by one of my engineers, by the way. And the reason why, how do you handle where everyone says PHP is terrible? And then you end up with this sort of quote from Jeff Atwood where you say that Wikipedia is written in PHP, TOB is written in PHP, WordPress, Dig, all these things are written in PHP. Do you notice a pattern here? Pattern, I like that word, pattern. How do you square those two circles between Jeff Atwood's thing and the fractal bad design? Well, here are the complaints in the fractal bad design, right? As soon as it comes up. It's full of surprises, it's inconsistent, it's not concise, it's flaky, it's opaque. Well, last time I checked, so is JavaScript. It's not like PHP is the only one. So is HTML and CSS. It's full of all these things, right? So is design itself. Design itself is inconsistent, it's flaky, it's opaque. So is producing software. When we write software, not the actual code we're writing, but the act of creating a product that people use that's compelling is all of these things. And so is the English language, which I'm using to communicate to you, and I use to communicate to my engineers. It's full of, it is the fractal of bad design, but somehow it is prevalent. English is prevalent. All of these things are prevalent because it's not about where we are, it's about where we're going with these things. It's about getting there. And that's where, like, those arguments they just fall flat. It's like, I don't give a shit how nice my language is, where my commas or ors placed and whether I use Oxford comma or not. I just care that I communicate to people. And if I can communicate to people using a lot of cuss words, which I'm not using that many from my regular habit, but that's because I'm a manager now, and people get scared when you're a manager and you use too many cuss words. So I usually avoid it nowadays, so I'm not in like the role of like fucky, fuck shit. But the point is we need to communicate, and how we choose to do that, that frame matters, right? Because if we aren't, we're not empowering people to create great products. So these are some talks I couldn't fit into my talk. So I want you, and the reason I have this slide, I want you to take what you've learned and apply it, whether it's in design or software or management or product or these things. You can code and design people. Like, my job now is not to code software. I've only coded one day at the foundation, and it was during a hackathon. It was the guided tour thing, by the way. I didn't actually do I did the guided tour as a demo, and then one of my engineers was like, hey, that's cool, and actually deployed it. And did all the real work of debugging it. I still get the bug reports, but I never respond to them. Because I'm a manager now, I'm not supposed to do that. But I try to code, I know coding, I try to code my engineers in the form of giving them the right software, writing the right software for them to apply to do things. And you can do the same whether you're a coder or a designer, that this is what it's about. You take the things that you learned at the conference today and figure out how it provides the language and the frames by which you can influence the world and change the world and be what you saw in that video where the web is a human right. That's it. That's my talk. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. Yeah, I do if anyone has questions. So, yeah.
What was the image of the call to action on that day where you had that huge spike?
Oh, that's
curious
on the fundraising?
Yeah, there was one.
Okay. That's when we actually turned it on. So the days before that, it was just in A/B testing mode. And that was actually the first day of it going on. And sometime during that day, Reddit came and they had contests on Reddit to who could donate more. So we had gobs of money come in that day, yeah. So that was the content of this spike.
Another question?
There's no single event, there's a sequence of events because there's some sort of time lag. But what we can find out by looking at other wikis that also had the decline is that there are certain traits of all those wikis. So we have some wikis that are not declining, like Spanish Wikipedia is increasing, but German is declining. And what we found in all of those is that while we can't point to a single event, the increase in policy and behaviors that exhibit that sort of policy, basically batting people down with things like reverting them. And we have language like revert, page patrolling. The major bot that handles patrolling pages for vandalism actually has a cop in front of it. And it gives you an idea, like, to the page patrollers, it's a video game where the job is to shoot noobs, right? Boom, 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 you're a vandal, right? And while that's very gamified for them, it doesn't create a good experience for you if you edit it. And actually, I finally created an article on Wikipedia. It was on the inventor of the metalwood, the metal driver. And there was no Wikipedia entry in, so I just created it. But I created a stub, it was reverted almost immediately. But because I know this, I went and I sent a talk page message to the person who reverted it and explained, well, can you just make it a stub and then let it in because actually this person is relevant, right? And he did that, and so that article's live. And I got a link notification because Echo's live, when someone started linking to my articles. So I'm like, whoa, this is cool. We're getting positive feedback. The whole point of mentions and thanks is to give that more positive feedback. And basically, Wikipedia is full of this negative feedback and full of policy that is very complicated. The original pillars of Wikipedia are very simple. There are 4 of them. They're assume good faith, no original research because it's an encyclopedia, neutral point of view, and ignore all rules. And the irony is the 4th pillar is a joke because Wikipedia is full of rules now. And we're not holding true to that. And we run into the same thing at the foundation. When I'm at the foundation, you run into this issue where people are afraid of setting down any rules because on like example is there's a big RFC on English Wikipedia to revert the visual editor. This is a feature they've been asking for a decade now, and now that it's deployed, they actually want to undo it, right? And how do you deal with that? And the answer is, if you deal with it as a case-by-case basis, you effectively create a rule. If you say, well, German Wikipedia, we undid it, and 10% of German Wikipedia editors actually responded with a no, and that's why we undid it. Then you've created a rule where the foundation is driven by community if community can get 10% or more votes, right? But if you say, well, the purpose is to discuss in the vision statement, in freely sharing that information, then if you can come up with arguments that speak to that vision statement, i.e. reversions increase when the visual editor comes out, or there's a massive decrease in the amount of edits to Wikipedia because the visual editor is too hard to use, then you have a case to revert the visual editor. But until then, there's no framework. And the beauty of that is that framework isn't a specific rule so much as a guiding policy. And that's the beauty of core values. It's not what you do and what you don't do. It's the core values create that framework, whether it's at the foundation or among your engineers or in a whole organization.
I think that's the last question. We're out of time. So how about a round of applause for Terry? I just want to say thank you to all the speakers. So round of applause for all of our speakers.